Hi, I'm economist Robert P. Murphy. In this video, I want to give a little background about myself and then explain the benefits of using my textbook, Lessons for the Young Economist. So first, a little bit about me. I did my undergraduate work in economics at Hillsdale College, a liberal arts school in Michigan, which I chose because it had the personal library of Ludwig von Mises, a famous economist in the 20th century who was the leader of what's called Austrian economics. After leaving Hillsdale, I went to New York University. I chose NYU because it too had a rich tradition in Austrian economics. Mises himself had taught there for many years, and when I was there, it still had several prominent Austrians who either taught at NYU or would visit its weekly colloquium. After getting my PhD from NYU, I returned to Hillsdale where I taught for 3 years. Then in 2006, I left academia and went into the financial sector. I was hired by Laffer Associates. That took me down to Nashville, Tennessee. While there, I did things such as helping with writing research papers for clients, updating the computer models that kept track of the stock portfolio, and then updating the actual holdings of the portfolio for various clients when it was time to rebalance. So I like to think that while working at Laffer Associates, I learned some of the nuances about how things really worked in the financial sector that I wouldn't have picked up just from studying textbooks and drawing curves on blackboards in the classroom. After leaving Laffer Associates, I went into business for myself. I'm the president of Consulting by RPM. That's my website, consultingbyrpm.com. My clients typically want me to explain government policy or the workings of a market economy for a lay audience. So that's the way to describe what I've been doing for the last several years, is that I take complicated either government policies or workings in the market economy, and I'd like to think explain them fairly intuitively to a lay audience. So that leads us to the textbook, Lessons for the Young Economist, which I wrote for the Mises Institute. They're the publishers of it. I should say at the outset that, especially if you're a homeschooling parent or student, you're going to appreciate the fact that the Mises Institute makes these materials available for free. You can just get the PDF of both the textbook for the student and the teacher's manual online, either just by Google search or it's in the comments of this YouTube video. The one thing you won't get is if you look at the PDF of the teacher's manual, you'll see the sample quizzes and tests, but you won't see the answer key. That's the one thing you need to buy the original physical book for. Sorry kids, but we're not stupid. So as far as the student text, what does it cover? It's split up into 4 main sections. The first is the foundations of economics, explains what are the boundaries of economic science, what is the foundation of it, what makes economics a discipline, a scientific inquiry in its own right, but yet why is it distinct from history? Why is it not really the same thing as physics or chemistry? And then we'll see it's not just the subject matter is different, but the method that economic theory uses is distinct from the appropriate method in those other fields I mentioned. In the second section, we walk through the operation of a pure market economy. So here we start with the basics. We imagine Robinson Crusoe on a tropical island all by himself with just his raw labor power initially and then a bunch of natural resources, and we show how he can combine his labor with the natural resources to build capital goods and to sustain himself. And there's a surprisingly large amount of economic theory that you can derive and apply even in that isolated setting. Then we expand it to a community with many people and show how trade emerges. We show how barter prices emerge. And we walk through a fairly sophisticated analysis, each step of which is not too complicated, but by the end of it, the reader will have a very strong understanding of where prices come from. Then we also cover the emergence of money, and you'll see that it doesn't take a government to invent money, but it can emerge spontaneously from voluntary market transactions. Even though no individual or group plans or sets out to invent money, it just emerges spontaneously. So that's a pretty neat little application. Near the end of this section, we get into some advanced topics like the stock market. We also go over the benefits of saving and investment and explain why is it that a community where people save and invest will have a much higher standard of living over time compared to another community where they don't save and invest as much. In the third section of the book, we cover the theory of pure socialism and then also look at the empirical record. So here we cover one of Ludwig von Mises's most important contributions to economics, which is the explanation of the fundamental problem with socialism. So it's not merely that a socialist community suffers from a problem of incentives, but also one of what Mises called calculation. Specifically, because the central planners don't have genuine market prices, they don't know the relative worth of different resources. So they can look at an operation that has a bunch of inputs and a bunch of outputs, and they have no way of determining whether the operation is economically efficient or not. And so when you study the problem of socialism, in contrast, it shows you why capitalism is so successful. It shows the importance of genuine money prices for capital goods. Finally, in the last section of the book, we cover interventionism. So that's the system where the government nominally allows free enterprise, private ownership of the means of production, what many people just call capitalism, but the government doesn't allow pure laissez-faire capitalism. Instead, it intervenes quite heavily. And so we cover some standard topics in this section, such as minimum wage laws, and show how they create long-term unemployment among unskilled workers, rent control, which causes shortages in housing. We also cover drug prohibition and show that many of the social ills commonly attributed to the use of illicit drugs is actually greatly exacerbated by the government's prohibition itself. So, for example, drive-by shootings with drug dealers killing each other, that is not the fault of cocaine or heroin per se. That's the direct result of government efforts to crack down on it. Just like in 1920s in Chicago, there were gangland slayings over the distribution of alcohol, whereas nowadays you would never see liquor store owners shooting each other up. We also, by the very end of the book, get into some fairly advanced topics, culminating in a theory of the business cycle, showing how government efforts to provide what's called counter-cyclical policy, where the Federal Reserve in the United States, for example, will cut interest rates in order to stimulate spending and output during a recession, that actually sows the seeds for the next unsustainable bubble and bust. So here too, as in all these other areas that we're going to examine, we see that it's ironically government intervention allegedly to correct the ills of the marketplace that causes the very problems in the first place. So in summary, I would encourage you, if you're especially a young student, but also someone who perhaps never really got a solid foundation in economics, to check out my book, Lessons for the Young Economist. The examples and language are, of course, tailored to younger people. If you want a specific age range, I had in mind anywhere from 7th grade through 10th grade when I wrote it. And when I was deciding what to put in the book and what to exclude, the criterion I used was, I said, suppose this is the one book that someone reads on economics in his or her entire life, what needs to be in this thing? All right, and so that's how I chose the examples, because as you'll see if you read it, there's a lot of information about how the world works that economic theory, economic science provides. It informs much of the current debates over government policy, and someone who is ignorant of basic economics is very ill-informed and really has no business commenting on government policy. So the only way we're going to get a better world is if more people learn basic, solid economics, and I encourage you to give my book, Lessons for the Young Economist, a shot for the source of that information. Thanks, everyone.